Good morning, everyone. And it's really nice that actually to see 52 attendees have been registered and to have this webinar, how we are going to handle the various aspects related to the coronavirus disease that is spreading over from 2019 December, which has impacted a lot on the value chain, not only on rare earths, on other aspects too. So on behalf of REIA, and I welcome you all. And at the same time, it's one of the REIA fulfillment aspect that we need to bring all the stakeholders and their experiences to be shared together on a global level to see what we can do and also get the insights from the EU Commission and constantly. I would like to thank you for participating here and accepting our request. And if you see actually here from our perspective, I just would like to give a small insight before I hand over the presentation to Lutz. At Grundfos, we being as a downstream suppliers, rare earths actually didn't impact much on our aspect in the supply chain perspective. But after the European things which has been closed, actually like Italy has been closed, France has been closed, Spain has been closed, then we have seen actually a huge drastic impact on the other components, especially related to the special steels and related to the soft magnetic steels which are used in our products. But we try to handle those things very carefully because we have a special agreements actually in order to make these things, where it ended up very expensive, but still we are able to manage to get the things. The main aspect here is actually related to the rare earths. We have handled this kind of situations even when we have this crisis in 2009 and 2010 with respect to the price fluctuation. We anticipated actually any kind of these kind of situations might arise, and that helped us a lot in managing the value chain. So, and I would like to leave the things to Lutz Banner, and I would like to hear more from the other people actually how they are looking at this crisis and how they are going to handle the crisis. And also would like to hear more about the policy aspects from Constance. That would be very interesting how to secure the euro from this. So thank you very much to everyone, and I hope you will enjoy this very nice webinar with various insights from the downstream players, from the miners, and from the processing aspects, how they are, and the policy. So thank you very much, Lutz. You can keep moving on with the presentation. And the agenda is being divided into 15-minute session for every participant, the speaker, where they will be explaining the various aspects what they're experiencing. And then we will have the last half an hour session with respect to the discussions, if any insights has to be shared. So Nabil will be monitoring the things. Please go ahead, Lutz.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share some insights here from my work. We are working as consultants to manage supply chains for medium-sized companies, for German companies mostly. We currently have 10 suppliers that we actively manage for 3 German customers. So it is important that everybody understands that what I am saying does not have full representative power over any particular industry or any particular country or any particular group. They're snapshots. What we do have is a lot of deep experience. The supply chains that we do manage, about half or a little bit more than half of the suppliers we manage are rare earth magnet suppliers. So where the concrete connection to REIA comes in. And I'm very happy to see that also as one of the speakers later we have Golden Dragon Rare Earth. I'm very much looking forward to their experience from the ground as well. I would like to start with a short overview of the impact of COVID-19 on China, then talk about the experiences we had in February and March with Chinese suppliers, very specifically, and then how to proceed. The impact of COVID-19 on China is very large. Here we see the Purchasing Manager Index in orange, including the drop of 2020 now from COVID, and also comparing to the drop that we saw in 2008 during the financial crisis, and we see that it's a deep cut that we see here. Even more importantly, I personally think, is the blue line, which is the Industrial Production Index, where we see that the impact this year is much stronger than the impact in 2008, 2009. So we see from a macro perspective, very strong impact on the Chinese industry. Now looking forward, we look at the impact on growth, and I will come later to the connection between the two. The blue scenario here is what basically would have happened or what was forecasted without COVID-19. The orange, and this was published on March 12th, so we need to be a little bit careful here. The orange was the base case where the Western world would not be so much affected by COVID-19, just a little bit, so to say. And then the blue case, the light blue case, is the pandemic scenario. I will leave it up to everybody to make their own assessment which scenario is now the most likely. But no matter what, we see a significant drop in growth or a significant recession globally. And of course, suppliers, when we talk about rare earth, Chinese suppliers have a key role in keeping the world economy running with rare earths. And as the customer market, the consumer markets of the Chinese rare earth suppliers now enter into recession, this is of course what the suppliers are very concerned about. So this is a short backdrop. We see this double punch of first the suppliers had problems and now the customers have problems. So what did we experience concretely in the last 2 months? In a nutshell, in February, our German customers were very concerned about their Chinese, and we were talking to the Chinese suppliers to find out what is going on in China. In March, very suddenly, the whole thing turned around, and the Chinese suppliers started to be very concerned on their regarding their customers. And we found it in our supply chains, it was quite manageable because our supply chains are set up on a very long-term relationship, very deep. We saw, however, a lot of reports in the media regarding all kinds of things. And this week I had the opportunity to hold a similar speech with purchasing managers for the Deutsche Messe, for the Hannover Messe. There we could do a small poll. So we got some numbers that I would like to share with you. Also to put into perspective what we read in the media or what we read in the polls from, for example, the Machine Building Association, the VDMA, which has, of course, a macro perspective. So what are the German views here on the Chinese suppliers? The first question that I asked managers was, during the COVID-19 crisis in February and March 2020, most companies in China had to reduce or stop their production. This strained the supply to customers in China and Europe. Was your Chinese supply chain affected to the degree that you had to install concrete measures that went beyond pure crisis communication? Because in our supply chains, it was just communication that was needed. The suppliers were very quick to come back online, very quick to manage it so that the disruption to their customers would be minimized. So we see this here also in these responses. So 69% said no, it was limited to communication. That's good. Then the next phase was Chinese companies are now concerned about the customers in Europe, both because of personal concern for the people, right, and because of potential revenue losses. Are your Chinese suppliers currently actively asking you regarding the situation and outlook in Europe? And they're also not surprising, but good to know. More than 3/4 of the purchasing, yes, the Chinese suppliers are asking us. And I can tell you from experience, they're not just asking about the revenue. They're really asking about how they can support and so on. So this just as confirmation of where we stand and where the relationships stand. In general, when we work on supply, we always focus on the partnership aspect. And what are partnerships? And I think in purchasing, this is extremely important. Partnerships are based on contracts. They're based on operational relationships, which means transactions, buying products. And finally, they're based on personal relationships. And we see in this crisis that when those three come together, then we have sustainable partnerships. And these sustainable partnerships are now in full play as the Chinese suppliers are supporting the German customers. And so we also in the same poll, we asked the question, how do you currently see the role of Chinese suppliers for your company? And there, about half of the companies said everything is normal, and that's good, so we can focus on the problems we have here. Less than 1/3 said that they don't quite believe it's over yet in China. And then interestingly, and most importantly, 23% of respondents said this is really a contribution that Chinese suppliers are making to the German companies now. And this goes beyond just supplying products, not making trouble, so to say. So this is the brief summary on where we stand, what the concrete experiences were. Now, how to proceed? First, I would like to share with you what we have learned about the supplier's perspective. And I would be very interested also later to hear perspectives from this. The question that the suppliers are asking themselves right now are, anywhere in the world, are, will the customers still order? And this is, of course, the core question. But after that, the question is, can the suppliers rely on the customer's fulfillment of the purchase promise? Because we see everywhere in the world, we see that order products, suppliers produce, suppliers inform the customers, hey, products are ready for pickup. And then customers say, oh, sorry, we don't need it anymore. So this is, for the supplier, of course, an existential risk. Either because the customers have economic problems and so they're not able to fulfill the promise, or because customers used unreliable ordering behavior and never intended to fulfill the promise with all suppliers. For example, customers might have been concerned that suppliers could not fulfill the orders, and so they order with several suppliers. So this is a very difficult situation for the suppliers, and also at the beginning, a lot of suppliers said, okay, we're shifting now our focus, we're shifting it to China, or putting more emphasis on the Chinese market because we're concerned about the European or global markets. Actually, it turns out this is not quite so easy. The domestic market in China is a different ballgame from the export market. There are different rules, there's intense competition, and so a supplier who is successful in export will not automatically be successful in the domestic market. So for the suppliers, no matter, and this of course focused on China, it's our specialty, but no matter where they are, it's a very, very difficult situation. And we do expect that a significant number of Chinese companies will have problems. And there, if the companies are already having problems, and then the customers are not reliable in their ordering behavior or in their purchasing promises, then of course it's even worse. So in this crisis, suppliers, no matter where they are in the world, they're absolutely reliable customers who communicate openly with the suppliers. So in summary, and this is my last slide, advice to customers. First, the not so good things, what to avoid. Panic communication, obviously. However, If one is not well prepared, then it's very difficult to avoid panic communication. If the supplier gets the impression that the customer is panicking, then the supplier has an even bigger problem. Generally, intransparency or fake optimism. This is deadly for the suppliers. They don't know what's going on. If the customers are just saying, "Oh, everything's fine," and then suddenly the orders are not coming, then this makes any kind of planning, of course, impossible for the supplier. Unilaterally pressuring the supplier. Customers sometimes have the tendency to contribute something, to take part, to participate in the losses of the customer, and so on. In this particular situation, this might very quickly lead to existential problems for the supplier, because we are not in a growth phase. The supplier is getting this from everybody. Volumes, I already mentioned, unstable ordering behavior. The suppliers need to plan their production, they need to plan their supply chains as well. And finally, the most deadly of all, not honoring agreements, not honoring purchase orders, or also any other kind of agreement. Now is the most important thing is stability. So what should companies do? Most importantly, transparent and realistic communication with your supplier. We currently inform our suppliers that we manage, we inform them every week regarding the situation in Europe, and very specifically regarding the situation of our clients, who are their customers. We are in the special situation that we currently have very little exposure to the automotive markets, which right now is good. General industries tend to be a little bit less, both because the general industries don't have so much downturn immediately, and because the companies in those industries, like Badrinath already said, they can actually work with stock, whereas automotive a lot of times is focused on just-in-time and minimization of stock and so on. So communicate transparently and realistically with your supplier. And most importantly, of course, don't expect that you can tell them something that's not sustainable, because they have a lot of sources, they have a lot of customers, and the suppliers, of course, put together the puzzle of the various information very well. Plan the crisis together with your supplier as partners. Tell them about what your needs are, so you can together make a plan, for example, regarding prioritizing certain orders or pushing back other orders. If everybody just says, my orders need top priority, all of them, then of course there's no prioritization. Many small updates are better than a few big ones, and this is especially true now. Keep the small connections with WeChat, phone calls, and so on with your suppliers. And be empathetic to the supplier's situation inside and outside the concrete transaction frame. This is very easy to say. It's very difficult to do, because we're all over. I don't know where all those people are sitting in home office having freedom and boredom. I don't see it. Everybody I know is working a lot more than before. So try to be empathetic. Try to understand what is going on with the supplier, the people, or the families. It's very stressful for everybody, and you will find that talking to somebody who has been through isolation and through quarantine already can be very beneficial as well for your own situation. And then you will find that the relationship, of course, going through a together, the relationship will be stronger. And there will be a time after the crisis. So we should be ready and prepared for that. And we need good relationships after. And finally, don't hesitate to suppliers for help. Right now, we are seeing that our customers are basically stocking up on protective masks, the simple masks. through micro shipments from their suppliers. So one customer has 4 suppliers. Each supplier sent 500 masks. So the customer now has 2, those simple ones that they will need sooner or later in their own production. There are about 70 production workers in the customer. So this will last for a long time. And so this kind of decentralized help, it's a win-win situation for everybody. But there are also other things. Don't hesitate to ask your suppliers for help with planning the production, for example, with changing payment terms if you need. They may not always be able to do that, but it's always good to communicate. So in summary, as you're fighting for your own survival, don't let yourself to death. This is the message I would like to convey here. I hope this was interesting to you guys, and you could follow the argumentation. And if there are any questions, Nabil, I will leave the question management to you. And also, if anybody would like to get in touch afterwards, you can either use my here on the left, or you can contact me also through Nabil. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Lutz. So you can send me a question by email or through the panel. The panel, there are some questions you can ask. So anyway, we have next the speaker from the European Commission, from the DG Grow, Ms. Constance Weir, and we works with the unit of DG Grow, and we are very happy and grateful that you could join. And also thanks Milan Grohol, and he's also participating in the conference and the webinar. And you can give your perspective from the European Commission side, and how is the impact, and what is the initiative that you have taken. And thank you so much.
First of all, hello to everyone. Thanks to Badrina and Nabil for inviting me to speak. I want to start off with something that looks like ancient history now, but in fact, in political terms, is actually quite recent and has happened since the last meeting that we had in November. So since November, we came out with the EU Green Deal, which is a priority of the von der Leyen Commission, which says that access to resources is a strategic security question to fulfill the Green Deal's ambition of becoming the first climate neutral continent. Which also includes ensuring a supply of sustainable raw materials, and in particular of critical raw materials. As you are well aware, the EU regards rare earth elements as critical, which are necessarily for clean technologies, digital, space, and defense applications. So this happened the end of last year. As I said, it looks like ancient history by now, but it's really not. It's still something, well, this is something that will come regardless of this current crisis. And I think sometimes within all the panic, it's important to kind of remind ourselves that there are other priorities that we should be looking at too. Then slightly less ancient history, just before the crisis hit Europe. We published a new industrial strategy for Europe, which again calls for a secure supply of clean and affordable energy and raw materials. To create lead markets in clean technologies and ensure that our economy and our industry remains competitive and remains front runners in this transition. And what I find slightly ironic now, but again, at the time that this was written, right before we all went into lockdown, it also, reminds us that those who move first and move fastest will hold the greater competitive advantage. And I regard this now with a big question mark, but it is still there and it is still an ambition. Also, around the same time, we published the second Circular Economy Action Plan, which wants to create a well-functioning EU market for secondary raw materials. So this is looking into end of waste criteria, cross-border initiatives for harmonization, standardization, and wants to establish a market observatory for key secondary raw materials, which, you know, in this case would also apply. So this is the political update since, you know, REIA last met. The new industrial strategy also mentions or puts forward, well, it doesn't put forward, but it announces a raw materials action plan, which is coming, and talks about the role of industrial alliances on low carbon industries and raw materials. In terms of our own work in the raw materials unit, we are, you know, due to other considerations currently being more urgent, slightly delayed in bringing out our 2020 assessment of critical raw materials, which then should also contain said raw materials action plan. But we assume that it will come before the summer, hopefully, you know, everything being slightly up in the air and slightly unknown. This is something that we still expect to happen fairly soonish. Again, in political terms, I talk about soon, not necessarily in what feels like. Our criticality assessment this time will also, besides the usual background report and or the usual report of the assessment and the fact sheets that we publish for the assessed materials, contain a report on well, foresight, say an initial foresight report on what we see coming or what we saw coming. So it contains a foresight report, which is based on the scenarios we've been working with, which obviously did not take any kind of global pandemic into account, on how to reach climate neutrality and what kind of raw materials we need for that. So this is something to look forward to. And this is what we are doing in this area and what has been happening in this area. You asked me to, you know, mention things that the European Union is doing regarding the COVID-19 crisis. And I want to say we are doing a lot of things, way more than I am personally aware of. I will mention a couple of things, but it's in no way complete. And the use of it is also not necessarily, the use of all these instruments is also not necessarily in my area of expertise. But so the ECB has been quite active on an emergency purchase program with assets and bond purchases to the tune of 750 billion euro. It is also working on monetary policy regarding long-term refinancing operations to ensure immediately, liquidity, lower interest rates for bank lending, in particular for SMEs, and relaxed requirements for commercial banks to hold securities and all of this. The EIB, so the European Investment Bank, has a 40 billion euro program to alleviate liquidity and working capital constraints. And the Commission has introduced a temporary framework for state aid measures. We have also beefed up the cohesion funds, the Stability and Growth Pact, And there has been, InvestEU also received extra money to kind of ensure more flexibility for the member states. You might well be aware of the SURE program, which is for unemployment money. And this is, and of course, we're working on green lanes for border management and for easy passage for necessary supplies. So this is what I am aware of in terms of, programs. We do not yet have the exit strategy. This is something that that is now being discussed at the highest levels. And we also do not necessarily know yet what the complete fallout of this is. As with everyone, it is very hard, it is very much a crystal ball to look into what this actually means for our economies. But we are all painfully aware that the impact is tremendous. And we, as from the European Commission side, we will, I think, try as much and our best to alleviate the consequences, however much that may be. That again is part of the crystal ball. So this is it from me. I want to kind of echo the speakers that have, well, Badrina and Lutz, who have come before me, and ask you to provide us, input, quantitative, qualitative, on how the pandemic is affecting you, what your real problems are, what do you face a decrease in trade, in production, in orders? What does the change in prices for raw materials do for you? We are aware that there's a global logistics problem, but how big is it actually? Because the better we know what your problems are, the better we can try and address them in one way or another. And this is it from me.
Thanks. Thanks a lot. It is very informative. And if we get some questions, I will forward to you, or we will raise it during the discussion. And also, it was nice you asked our members and also others that if they have any concern or the quantitative and qualitative data that they can share with the European Commission, then you can exactly look at the policy issues and take appropriate steps. And we will surely come up with some certain suggestions for you, and look forward. And yeah, thank you so much. And then we will keep the questions for the last, otherwise we already a bit late, and yeah, we'll have the questions.
I think it's Badrinath here, Constance.
Yeah.
It's really nice actually. Thank you very much, and I truly appreciate that actually you asked us to collect the data, and we will certainly do that for your information, and we'll keep you updated on this case, and we will act on these things with our stakeholders.
Thank you very much.
The next speaker, I asked Andreas, our REIA founding member from Italy, and they have been struggling with this crisis for long. And we had a presenter from PricewaterhouseCoopers, but the last moment they said they could not join, but they would share their the presentation at later stage. So now we will have the presentation from Andreas from BNC.
Good morning to everybody. So I just focused to present what is the impact to our production in Italy about rare earth supply chain. In particular, we use permanent magnet from China. From February 23, when Wuhan was locked down totally, we scare a little bit because the proportion of the action was totally unknown. The luck is that was Chinese New Year time, so they just chose to keep all the manufacturing closed and don't open as the schedule was in early February. So at the end of the day, it was not so big problem to manage at the time, just the problem of delay in transportation and logistical way. Anyway, I just take a choice to speak about rare earth supply chain, but of course, it could, what we did and what's happened in China, of course, is the totally the same for other kind of components. Anyway, BNC Speakers Group is an Italian loudspeakers, professional loudspeakers manufacturing, who own 3 brands after BNC Speakers. Sorry, we own 18 Sound and Shared, other 2 small company in Italy, very famous for professional audio market. So just a few information for you to understand how important are the neodymium permanent magnets. Just some number to let you understand the difference with the ferrite magnet in our product. Of course, we produce 700,000 products per year, and the 63% in 2019 was using permanent neodymium magnets. It looks just the difference in weight. We imported 170 tons of magnet, neodymium magnet, versus almost 600 tons of ferrite. Even ferrite is a very small portion of our production. So the total weight difference is 78% between them, and the single product weight is 82% less. So permanent neodymium magnet is very important for us. Our supply chain, of course, is in China, and maybe is the most critical and necessary component we use in our production, as every product we produce, and some of them use 2 magnets, of course, use the magnet. We have 2 qualified suppliers. One is in Zhejiang province and the other is in Jiangsu. And calculating in 2019, we used 54 tons of praseodymium and 4 tons of dysprosium, and the most critical rare earth component element for us. And the praseodymium comes from Inner Mongolia, the famous mine close to Bautu, and the dysprosium comes from Jiangxi province. We import around 16 full containers per year, and with a shipment cost calculated around $30,000 US versus 120,000 custom duties. Transit time is 35 days each container. So what we did when the crisis exploded in February, we had several meetings in the company trying to understand first what was happening in China. And of course, the great partnership that we have with supplier permits us to have real and online information on what was happening there. And the supplier were really open mind with us and told always what they knew, because it was not easy also for them. It's just like we in Italy now, we don't know exactly what's tomorrow. So it's difficult to have a plan to say to our customer, we will open our production next week or May 5, we don't know. So it's not really easy to bear this kind of situation. So what we plan is increase absolutely the sharing information, the contact with our supplier. We had one Skype meeting per day, more or less, with top management. We asked the advanced shipment to supplier because especially with one, the most important, we used to have a Kanban routine order. So it means they have a good stock of material ready to be shipped. And then we ask them to ship as soon as possible everything they have in stock. We try to optimize the routing with forwarder, just looking for the routing who works, because also the shipping and the forwarding was affected, of course, by COVID-19. So it was not clear which delivery we can catch, which kind of vessel we can catch, and so also that kind of job was really hard and tiring. We increased a lot the sharing information with everybody in the supply chain, forwarder and supplier. We try to evaluate alternative logistic option. We did a lot of air shipments. Of course, I'm speaking when they open again the facility around February 10, and trying to reduce also the general rules of the contract, of the supply contract we have, especially on time in full requirement. Later, we start to revise, to change the purchasing order plan already sent to the supplier, because we had to understand the priority we had at that time. We increased the stock of material, of component in our warehouse, trying to have a sort of pillow in house. Also, the inner work with other department in the company increased a lot the report to let the people be informed online about what was happening and the action we planned to have. Production management was a little bit crazy because they had very few information about the material arriving, and just reduce a lot their action time, of course. And we also tried to find a supplier in Europe, but was not possible for some technical reason. In around the end of February, early March, the situation in China was almost 100% recovered. So also our situation was quite good. We were quite happy about that, because at that time we didn't know what was happening in Europe as well. So now the current status is the supply chain is quite okay. Every company in Asia, not only China, recover quite a lot, except the south of Asia. And now we have some problem, because we have total reversal scenario. I mean, Italy is locked down by March 23. And we are lack of information, as I told you before. We don't know exactly when we could start again. Of course, we were very worried about the health of our workers at first, and we did a lot of action in the company. We reduced 50% of the workforce for 2 weeks before the closing. We made sanification for all the factory every 2 days. So lot of action unknown before were becoming common, usually daily things, and then start working with the mask and with gloves and far away each other. So it's really big impact also for human behavior, especially human behavior. Anyway, coming back to the business, we have at least 3 weeks production stock in house. Not very big, but not bad, considering how fast the things happen. We have locked the Italian harbor or airport, unfortunately, lot of shipments, because from when we closed, we haven't time to produce custom clearance documents. And so at the end of the day, we will pay also parking fee for this good. And generally the cost for delay in the custom will increase 15-20% by parking fees, of course. Depend how long the goods stay there. Also, we will be a problem to receive all these kind of goods because, of course, when you open again after 20 days or 1 month, everybody would like to have as soon as possible the goods, and forwarding will be really, really under pressure. So it's not a good situation. Of the delay time to have material will be higher. Also, and one of the most important is our production capacity will be totally affected from the arrival of material, and of course the revenue as well. What we are really worried is the workforce reduction we should have. Until now, the company is paying everything, is paying all the suppliers, no one is waiting money from us, and waiting the Italian government help for workers. So we are paying 100% the salaries. We choose to protect as much as we can everybody, and waiting what will be the choice of Italian government and a European government as well. What I can say from the customer side is some of them didn't pay the goods we shipped in March, telling the situation is very bad. A lot of them postpone all the order they sent us by June or July. Someone delayed orders. So the portfolio we have decreased 25% from early March to now. Okay, this is the situation of BNC speakers, and we all fight to get better news and to be safe at first. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Andrea. A very nice, profound explanation of what is happening with your supply chain with China. It's a very important question from one of our members. Is it very serious that you don't have enough supply now? If you said that you are not getting the European material, especially the magnets. If you get it, will you be able to pay a premium for that? What you said? What you think about it?
if the question it's mean about the value of the different value, different cost of
Yeah.
Europeans,
Yeah.
supplier,
Yeah.
of course we are aware about the different cost, and for sure we will agree, because
Yeah.
no other option.
Okay.
An important thing is we well remember in 2011, after, do you remember, rare crisis, was very difficult to have a permanent magnet because lack of material in Chinese domestic market, and the price increased 600 times about raw material, and of course the magnet increased 300 times the cost of the single magnet, and at the end we had a chance and lucky to save our supply chain of magnet, and what we saw at that time, the customer agreed to pay more because their production was their first top goal. Cannot stop their production. That's the meaning, and this is also for us, absolutely.
Yep. Okay. We will convey this, and maybe we'll have more questions during the discussion.
Sure.
And thank you for joining us. Thank you so much.
Welcome.
And now we have the presentation from Japan.
So firstly, I would like to explain about the current situation, also the number of deaths from the coronavirus in Japan. So fortunately, the number of the deaths by the coronavirus is not so big in Japan at this time. The first death from the coronavirus was in the middle of March, and the number of deaths is slowly increasing from the beginning of April just now, and because this season is the beginning of the Japanese fiscal year, the most of the business just begins from the beginning of April. The total number of deaths from the coronavirus is at this time, so maybe approximately 100. Okay. Oh, next slide. How to move to the next? Okay. So the Prime Minister Abe Shinzo proclaimed a state of emergency just yesterday, 7th April. Tokyo area, capital city area of Japan, and Osaka, the second largest population area of Japan, the Fukuoka area, northern Kyushu Island, shall be subject to the statement at least until 6th May. Under the control of this declaration, some imposition items shown on the right side of this slide. One of them is a shutdown of schools, nursery centers, elder care facilities. The second one is a restriction of sport games and music concert, request of the production for medical supplies to all manufacturers in Japan, and forcible expropriation of properties like hospital, schools, business building, and so on. One of the unique items under this declaration is the voluntary ban on leaving home to individual people. So now, we are working at home, excluding some special people, like transportation business, daily supermarket, hospital, and some governmental organizations. This figure, page 3, shows the consumer confidence index in Japan. After the pandemic of the coronavirus, this index rapidly falls in February 2020. This causes maybe worsening employment situation and the circumstances of life. So this impact is shown in the consumption volume, also production volume of some home appliances and automobiles in Japanese market. Page 4 shows the production volume change in Japan after the pandemic of the coronavirus. This table shows the production volume in February 2020, just last month, the last month before the March. For example, the raw materials like the crude steel, copper, keep the production volume this season. No big changes after the pandemic of the coronavirus in Japan. However, that production volumes of permanent magnet motors, television, like the home appliance, and passenger cars rapidly falls after the February this year. Maybe the production volume of some raw materials keeps their production volume because their impact of the change of the consumption is far from the production behavior of these raw materials in Japan. However, the impact of the coronavirus to their production to raw materials will be changes next month or next 3 or 2 months after the pandemic. So page 5 showed that import volume of rare earth in Japan. So the fluctuation of import volume of rare earth are shown in this figure. However, all raw materials related to the rare earth production, like the rare earth oxide and metals used for the permanent magnet and also catalyst, phosphorus, rapidly decrease from the beginning of this year, January 2020. So maybe we keep the production volume with a small change after the pandemic of the coronavirus. However, the impact of the coronavirus will be cover the production to raw materials in the near future in Japan. Okay, I'm sorry, very short slide because I have so many homework these days. Please, I welcome the so many questions on my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Kotaro-san. And yeah, it is nice to an overall view of how this impacted Japanese supply chain. And I have a very small specific question. Is there any government side initiative that they are kind of stimulus to the companies, and what is and how far it is being implemented?
Yes, very good question. So yesterday, the government of Japan just began to request to the all manufacturer to promote the production of medical supplies on behalf of their original production, if they can. However, some manufacturer has very less experience in the production of the medical supplies like the masks and sanitary goods. So the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry made some big subsidy to the manufacturer to invest build some production devices for the medical supplies.
Okay, thanks. And probably we'll have a couple of more questions at the end of the session.
Okay. Okay.
And thank you so much for joining.
Oh, thanks so much.
It's a bit,
Sorry to be late.
actually, it is a bit late. Yeah, no, especially it's a bit late evening in Japan, but we appreciate that you could join. Thank you so
Okay,
much.
thank you.
And now we have the next presentation by Will Davies, REA founding member, Makango Resources. Makango is developing a rare earth project in Malawi, in Africa. It would be nice, how the juniors, the exploration and junior mining companies see the impact of COVID. Is it impact their financing or development aspect, the work at the mine site? So I welcome Will to give his perspective.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to have the opportunity to speak this morning. So what I thought I'd do is just give a brief overview of Makango and what we're doing. Clearly, our experience doesn't apply to everyone in the junior sector. Please bear that in mind. So it's just a few aspects of what we're doing and potential in the future. So just a bit of background on the company, Makango. We're a Canadian and UK listed company. The predecessor company, Leominex, was formed in 2007, and we listed in Canada in 2011, January 2011, and then in the UK in 2016. So we've seen, a fair bit of volatility in the market over the years and experienced both its ups and downs. So the main focus, as Nabil mentioned, for the company, we're developing a rare earths project in Malawi. We're not a producing company, so we're currently completing a feasibility study for the project in Malawi. That will also encompass a separation plant. So we are looking at options to build a separation plant that'll be outside Malawi. So we're looking at options in Europe and the broader region. And we also have an investment in a business in the UK called Hypermag. So we have a 25% interest in Hypermag, and Hypermag is focused on rare earth magnet recycling. So we have a fairly broad footprint, and the management is senior management based in the UK. We also have a team in Malawi. We're currently working with groups in the UK, consultancy groups in the UK, in South Africa and in Australia.
Will, just an intervention, Will. So people may be wondering why they cannot see the slide. Actually, Will doesn't have a slides to present. So yeah, okay. That's it. Yeah.
So that's correct.
Yeah.
So just as I say, we have a broad footprint. We're a dual listed company. We're a Canadian company. In terms of financing, we have a strategic partner, Talaxis, which is a subsidiary of Noble Group. So Talaxis is fully funding our ongoing feasibility study, and they have an option to develop the project, fund the capex for an additional interest in the project. And so really that's the background. We're a fairly small team, and we work closely with a range of different consultancies in different countries. In terms of Malawi, there have been a fairly small number of reported cases in Malawi at the moment. There have been 8 cases, and sadly one person has died, but clearly it's not on the scale of what is happening elsewhere at the moment, albeit I suspect the impact is a lot broader. The government has put in various guidelines, and such as regular hand washing, social distancing, avoiding contact, and self-quarantine if returning from a country where they term it a hotspot country. Having said that, given that Malawi, is behind other parts of the world. We're expecting those restrictions to increase, including lockdowns on gatherings, etc., and similar sort of reaction that we've seen in other parts of the world. And we as a company, we're obviously looking how we can assist in country as well. And so really that's the broader broader impact in the country. Clearly it has to be viewed in an African context, and some of those controls and advice is going to be difficult to put in place in a sort of African context where you have villagers, they need to go to market, and it's a different context to the West and to Europe or elsewhere, for example, and other parts of the world and Asia. So I think we'll see how that develops. Certainly from the impact on the company, we haven't seen there's been little overall impact, from in terms of operations in Malawi. We followed advice, and certainly one of the first things we advised to all our local staff was that they should be working from home where possible, and and also we've assisted certainly our local workforce on site in terms of protective equipment, and also communicated what the issue and what's likely to be coming. So we finished our drilling last year, so we don't have any more drilling to do. So in actual fact, the operations on site are limited. It's limited to environmental baseline work and collecting dust samples, etc., and obviously monitoring the situation on site. So I think going forward, we don't anticipate there to be much more impact from a company perspective, in terms of Malawi. But I think there will be an impact in the country, in the broader country, and we're looking to assist where possible, sort of local population, and certainly at a village and broader level. I think clearly as we're going through a feasibility study, we were sort of having community meetings and meetings with government, and those will be curtailed for the time being, subject to how everything sort of recovers and gets back to normal. In terms of outside of Malawi, as I mentioned, we have work underway in Australia. In fact, most of the work is underway in Australia in relation to the feasibility study, and that is laboratories, 3 laboratories in Australia, and there's also one in the UK as well we're going to be using. They are all running, albeit with skeleton staff or split teams. So we haven't had any issue so far with that, and no issues about moving samples around or getting assays. So we haven't seen any impact from those operations, and similarly for South Africa. However, we have certainly added a bit of contingency into our timetable in anticipation of potential sort of issues that do come up. So that's really in terms of the work on the feasibility study. We're also, as part of that, we're looking at options for separation. Again, we completed site visits for potential locations some time ago, and it's mainly desktop work that's underway at the moment. So again, little overall impact. In terms of Hypermag, which is a UK-based company, affiliated with, or some affiliation with the University of Birmingham. So clearly in terms of staff and Hypermag, they're following the UK guidelines, working from home. Again, hasn't really had a sort of any major impact at all. you know, we're proceeding, working with Hypermag, as I say, no major impact. The work that's done at the moment can be done from home, so that's all, you know, that's sort of fine. So, you know, I guess looking at the sort of broader impact, you know, certainly in terms of the junior market, you know, the key driver is access to capital. You know, from our perspective, as I mentioned before, we're working with a strategic partner. You know, I think having been through previous downturns and, you know, looking at the potential impact, clearly your access to capital, it depends on the stage of the project. If you're reliant on public markets, then the situation becomes more tenuous. So if you have to go out and raise capital in the markets to fund either working capital or exploration or development, then I suspect, at least in the short term, there will be pretty significant negative impact. I mean, just looking at the TSX Venture Exchange as a sort of proxy for what's happened in the markets, it's certainly, as far as I could see, close or lower than 2008 levels. So in raising money from capital markets, really, you know, it'll depend on whether you have a supportive shareholder base. Clearly, you need to have a you know, good, strong project. You know, and in doing those capital raisings, there will be, you know, they'll be dilutive given what prices are out there, and warrants will be probably require warrants as well to get the financing done. And you also have the impacts on the share price of funds, investment funds exiting the sector. So I think, at least in the near term, it will, you know, it will have some impact on access to capital and the terms of those capital raisings. And this is really, you know, we're talking about sort of exploration or funding sort of working capital. In terms of more advanced stage projects, to a certain extent, you know, it'll depend on, you know, the shape of the recovery curve and when it comes, and what that'll do to rare earth prices and availability of capital. Volatility in the markets, you know, could potentially lead to delays in projects coming on stream, but it really depends on the impact on the sort of private equity groups and banks and family offices, and what the impact will be. You know, in some ways it's sort of fairly early days, so you know, there's still a lot of uncertainty out there and volatility in the market. So, you know, I guess we'll see where that sort of comes out. And also just looking at, you know, the timing and impact on the various different regions as sources of capital. Perhaps, you know, Asia coming out of the situation earlier than perhaps Europe and the US. You know, that'll have an impact on availability of capital to move these projects forward. And also, you know, expectations, for example, whether the US will have a, you know, worse than expected impact on it'll have a worse than expected impact on the US economy. A lot of private equity groups rely on the US for you know, for their underlying sort of funding. So again, a lot of uncertainty in the market, and we'll see how that sort of plays out. Just some other sort of questions really and potential impacts and sort of key considerations. I think, you know, going forward, you know, clearly with, you know, increased focus, the necessary increased focus on ESG requirements, clearly the response and companies' response to the virus is going to be, I think, a key consideration going forward. So I think that'll be, you know, built into that assessment. You know, question whether the impact on the markets, whether that'll be a trigger for, restructuring of the industry or further restructuring of industry in different regions, further concentration of the industry, perhaps vertical or sort of horizontal consolidation. I mean, some parts of the rare earth sector are pretty fragmented, so perhaps, you know, we could see that as a potential impact. Potential trigger for increased state involvement. You know, we're seeing that, you know, at a broader level at the moment. So we'll see how that sort of develops. And you know, obviously there's increased sort of focus on supply chains going forward. And you know, certainly from a rare earth, you know, developer and future producer, that's of interest for us. And but for the broader sector, it has to be balanced against the impact on access to capital sort of going forward. So really that sort of summarizes it from our point of view, and covered a few issues, both specific to Macango and broader. Yeah, thank you very much.
Yep, thank you, Will. And yeah, you gave a very nice presentation, and you know, touching all the aspects, impact of COVID on the sector, especially in Macango, and in Malawi, and also on the border aspect of the financial impact, how the investors look into these issues. And a quick question that I received, and then we may have more questions at the end. But a quick question is, since you know Macango is both involved in developing a primary project and also a secondary project, so this kind of crisis, could you see a triggering point focusing more on the secondary aspects like the recycling, you know, that you have with the Hypromag?
I think it's certainly I think it's complementary. You know, I think in terms of the, you know, when the growth comes, and you know, I think you know, going forward, we're still going to see that requirement for new sources of raw material. I don't think it's something that I don't think the secondary market provides 100% of the solutions. So I think new sources of raw materials are going to be, you know, absolutely key going forward. So I think it's complementary. You know, one thing I would say, you know, the capital requirements for a mining operation and processing plant are likely to be substantially higher than a recycling plant. So that would come into play. But for the sort of time frames we're looking at, you know, I think hopefully we'll be out of this sort of situation, and certainly we're looking at completion of our feasibility study second half of next year, and certainly you know, we'd hope to see things looking a lot better by then. So look, I think it's complementary. I think you need both.
Yeah, okay, thank you so much. That's a very good answer. And it should be always complementary. One cannot over, but I hope that there will be more emphasis or importance getting for the recycling, especially in the Western countries. Thank you so much again for joining us, and look forward to discuss with you all other issues. Thank you so much, Will.
Great. Thank you.
And now we have the last presentation before we go towards the discussions. And Kenny Liuing, another founding member of REIA from China, the GDRE, the Golden Dragon Rare Earth Company, now as part of the Xiamen Tungsten. Kenny, thank you so much for joining us.
Okay, hi to everyone. Very glad to have this opportunity to share with you the situation about coronavirus. First, I would like to start with the timeline of coronavirus in China. Just the milestones. Actually, we detected the first case in late December and announced lockdown on Wuhan on January 23rd. And from February 10th, people are getting back to work gradually, but it depends on the company because the government allows people to go to work, but the company can decide for themselves. Actually, by March 15th, the majority of the companies had resumed work. And, just today, Wuhan reopens after 76 days of lockdown. That's really good news. And here, there's some keywords I listed that we can feel from the fight against the coronavirus. Like a quick response. And the people first. We always put people and safety first, and make sure all persons are intended. And also very important, it's solidarity. When the government recommend masks and isolation at home, all people follow that rules. That's very, very important. So it's a very effective way to to curb the transmission. And here are some key factors in securing victory against virus. Detection. First, you have to identify the infected people. Reporting means to report your personal health information, your travel history, and even to report someone else who is a suspect. And isolation also, and monitoring. You have to monitor the records of each people, because some people sometimes they don't tell the truth. So we have a monitoring system, and we also have QR code. So nationwide, they will share your health information, your travel records, and so on. And not to mention social distancing and hygiene, but last but not least, wear masks. So in China, we always wear masks when we are out or we are out of home. So here also, I recommend everyone, especially from Europe or USA, to wear masks whenever you are out of home. You don't know who is infected. Some people, they are infected, but they don't show any symptoms. To wear a mask, on the one hand, it will protect you from being infected, and on the hand, to make sure the infected ones, they will not spread the virus to other people. Okay, and next, it's about the impact on the rare earth market. Sure, there is much influence. As we can see from this chart, it's a comparison between the exports of 2019, 2018, and 2020. There is a big drop year on year, especially in January and February. But the price in February actually went up because when the virus began, many customers, especially the consumers, they were much worried about the supply in China, because China is like the epicenter of the virus. So they started purchase to stock up, and which drove the price up a little bit. But in March, when the virus spread across Europe, USA, and the rest of the world, and the attention was on the rest of the world. So it's our turn to worry about the demand, not the supply side. And here is the utilization of capacity of PR&D manufacturers. Actually, in February, the utilization is very low. It's, in particular, the heavy rare earths. It's like 20 or 30%. Light rare earths was not as much affected. So this here, the annual output means PR&D. And on the left, we have the areas. And this graph shows the price trend since early 2019. As you can see, some elements, the price hit record low in March, like cerium, lanthanum, and titanium oxide, praseodymium also, because of the virus. But for heavy rare earths, for example, dysprosium oxide, terbium oxide, and lutetium oxide also, we saw price hike in February, because when the virus begins, the customers, they worry about the supply in China, so which pushes the price up. And other elements, they follow the similar trend. So judging from the situation, we so personally, just personal information, the government of China will probably launch a new round of stockpile to support the market in the next few months. And surely, because of the global economy, prices overall will fall again before getting any better. So we have to be well prepared for that. And but from the supply side, I think it's not there's no needing to worry about supply, because we have enough supply. So the only concern is about demand, because now the virus is getting worse in the rest of the world, and many manufacturers in Europe and the USA are closing. So now that's our main concern. For the first quarter, we didn't see much influence on our business actually, because in January people are building stock. February, customers were worried, so they also build more stock. And we only see the influence in March, because the price fell, and also the demand was shrinking. And because this, many companies, they reported contract cancellation. So there is a high risk. And we also face some problems with logistics, transportation. Many flights and vessels are cancelled, and they have many limits, like restrictions on the weight, on the route, and so on. So that is the main challenge. And also the transportation cost is very high now. And from the government side, we also have many, stimulating policies like, covering tax, rent, interest rate, and so on, from different level of governments to support, enterprises and individuals, and we really appreciate that. And now, except Wuhan, even Wuhan, it reopened today. We are getting back to normal. So we only keep our fingers crossed for the rest of the world. Hope this virus will be over soon, and we can celebrate final, victory together in the near future. And finally, take good care and stay safe. And also, if you want some medical supplies from China, please let us know. We will try our best to help, because now China is getting much better, and I think we can find some sources for emergency medical supplies. That's from me. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Kenny. It's really interesting perspective from China, and now the situation has completely turned around. It was started in China in early January, February. Now we see a completely different scenario on the demand side. We all worried initially on the supply side. Now you worry about the demand side. Hope we all come back to
now it's the other way around.
Yeah, and we all come back to normal very soon. And it's a good hope. And I have a quick question on the stockpiling. Is there any specific communication from the Chinese government side? When will they, if the price is too low or the supply is become more at certain point, will they start stockpiling? And will it also be based on the quota? So how much they will buy from each 6 groups? Will it be based on some quota, or anyone can sell to the government? How it will work?
Well, actually, there is no official release about this. It's just a guess from the insiders. So we don't have any official documents on that. And also, we have no idea how the government will launch the new stockpile. But it's just a guess.
And
chance is good.
And will they do this only for oxide, or will they do it for magnets as well, or the metals?
Normally it's for oxide.
Normally it's for oxide. Okay. And now this was the last presentation, and thank you all for joining. And I have already received few questions, and I can share this with the panelists. And if you have any questions to raise, please raise now.
Yeah, I have a question to BNC, because BNC is a downstream player in the European market, and they are also widely hit by the this COVID-19 in Italy. So I have a specific question with respect to the supplier-based choosing, because till today we have been looking actually single source supply. Do they have any overview for the future that actually they want to have a diversified supply? And
sorry, Badri, I lost some word. Which is the question?
The question is, today you are looking only one supply chain. You are having only one supply chain. That is from China.
We have two. We have two.
Two.
Yeah. And my question is, are you looking for the future to diversify your supply chain or the value chain?
Sure. Not only for magnet, frankly.
Yeah, it's not. I'm just not talking about magnets. I'm talking about every component that goes into you, because you are the downstream. Yeah.
Okay, that's clear. Yes, thank you for the question. For sure, Badri, we are working to diversify the supplier. Of course, we cannot face to be dependent from only one country. Even the cost could be different, but we are working on for sure.
Yeah.
Hi, this is Lutz. I have some experience to share regarding this question of diversification.
Yep.
In rare earths, we are dealing with a situation where it is very difficult to build up a true international diversification simply because so much of the supply is coming from one country. So I would like to share two aspects here. One is we have in the supply chains we manage, for already about 10 years, we have a very broad diversification inside China. So we are sourcing from magnet suppliers in various regions in China. And we found that in this particular situation, this was very helpful because some regions were more affected than others. That's one. The point being, regional diversification within China is very useful. That's one. The other aspect is when I had the webinar last week with the purchasing managers, I asked them very specifically how many of them were considering moving their supply chains overseas. And so there are two answers that are relevant here. One is that so far, only about 1/4 of purchasing managers had decided to build up additional supply chains outside China. And the other is that the active setting up of building up alternative supply chains is actually quite challenging. It's quite difficult because it takes the entire ecosystem to build the entire supply chain. And what we found also from the last crisis, from the financial crisis, where there were similar discussions, is that very often companies say they want to, but in the end, 5 years down the road, they still are in the same situation simply because it's not so easy. So that's just one. The second point being, one should be quite careful about actively setting up alternatives simply because it's not so easy, and one as a customer, one is also competing with other customers for the attention of the suppliers. Thank you.
Okay, so I totally agree with Luz about diversity, regional diversity, like within China. Yeah, it really helps. Back in 2011, when the price hikes up, many suppliers, mostly the small suppliers, they canceled the contract because the price changed from day to day. So they don't want to lose money. So they cancel the contract without thinking about the outcome. So it's very important to have a diversity of a supply, even within China. Sure, it's better if you have a international supply chain, but for the time being, it's difficult because for the magnet supplier, they need manufacturing, they need upstream support, and they face the cost issues. So it takes time. So I think now the wise choice is to develop diversity within China. You can have more suppliers with different advantages. You like our company, Xiamen Tungsten, it's state-owned, and we have a full industrial chain. It's in-house. We have our own mines. We have our own separation plant, metallization plant, phosphor plant, and magnet plant. So we can, guarantee stable supply, even especially, in crisis like back in 2011 and the virus. We don't need to worry about raw materials. We are self-sufficient, and we have downstream products which can, we can fine-tune the cost between different departments. So you can consider that.
Yeah, anyone have any point to raise that?
I think the question to Will could be a very relevant, because Will is also working on the other projects by establishing the secondary sources. Will, how you see that actually that Europe will cope up with, or else the other regions, the diversification will cope up with the secondary sources?
Sorry, I didn't catch that, budget. So how would Europe deal with?
Because you are also having a venture in establishing the secondary sources.
Yeah.
And how you see, because this situation, what we are facing today, will be a very realistic situation to look upon in the secondary sources, which is very well aligned with Constancy Mrs. V was mentioning about.
I think that one of the things that's attractive for us in terms of developing the secondary sources is that potentially it gives us a bit of a shortcut into downstream markets, and potentially the ability to accelerate that entry into those sort of downstream, albeit sort of secondary markets. And so, because certainly the technology we're looking at is to to shortcut some of those steps. So I think it's from that perspective, and also as I mentioned earlier, the sort of capital required is also lower. So where you in this sort of market where it's more sensitive to the absolute level of capex, it makes a lot of sense. So both from ability to fast track, ability to get into these downstream markets quicker, and the fact that it's lower absolute levels of capex, I think that's the reason we're certainly getting involved, and it's a key part of our strategy going forward.
Yep, thanks, Lutz.
Thanks,
Will. And yeah. Any questions to that or any other one? No, okay. So now I will have a few questions from the audience that they have already sent. Lutz, one is for you. Rob from Jelmag is asking, what is the main barrier for outside supply chain? I mean, the diversification of supply chain, is it largely on infrastructure or willingness of the customer to accept higher price? What is your thought on this?
Well, I think we need to differentiate whether we are looking at a short-term or long-term fix and building up alternative sources. In the short term, building up alternative sources is always very difficult because everybody is scrambling to get product at the moment, and we have the experience that sustainable and feasible, economically feasible solutions usually require long-term engagement.
So in the short term, it's always difficult. And what the concrete obstacles are depend also very much on the concrete situation. We found, for example, that the conditions during the crisis in China were very different depending on the regions. And we found that some of our suppliers, for example, in Inner Mongolia, they were basically not affected in terms of their ability to deliver goods, whereas suppliers in Zhejiang, especially Ningbo, they had a much deeper impact. So it's not so easy to answer such question regarding the short run in a general way. In the long run, building up alternative sources within China, I think the obstacles are not very big, to be honest. There are there's a good number of very capable companies in China. Depending on whether we're looking at raw materials, there, of course, it is dominated by the state companies. But when we're looking further in the midstream or moving into the downstream, there's a lot of private companies. It's a broad field. So we find that if one is looking in the right way and willing to engage companies in the long run, then the obstacles of setting up alternative supply chains are actually not very big. And we have also, in the past, we've been managing the rare earth supply chain for almost a decade now for our client. And during this time, we have onboarded 2 additional suppliers and are now onboarding a third additional supplier. So the obstacles are mostly about having the patience to develop a relationship and doing good purchasing work in general. I hope this answered the question.
Yeah, if not, I will come back to you. And Milan mentioned to Andrea, and he's asking what would be the volume or value of the impacted customers. Do you have any idea on that?
No, frankly, I didn't follow the start of your topic.
No, I think in somewhere in your slide you mentioned the impacted customers, or I have to see your slides. 69 plus 69 and 31. What was that percentage? I have to see.
63.
Yeah.
And 37. Okay. No, that's exactly in 100% of our production in 2019 was made by 63% of neodymium magnet product and 37% of ferrite magnet product. So that's I would like to underline how big is the part of neodymium magnet for us, how important they are.
Yeah, it's large. Yeah.
So, this is larger and increased every year. That was the answer.
Yeah. Okay. So if he has any other questions, maybe we can come back to you. Sure. But did you have any other questions, or anyone else from the panelists?
No, I have one question actually, which Lutz was mentioning. It's a bit confusing because when we are looking for long term, why again actually the eggs of all the eggs has to be kept in one basket, because today we are feeling the pain. And still, after looking at the pain, actually, his comment always states that actually diversification within the region, diversification within the region is nothing but putting the eggs in the one basket. How it can be validated?
Yeah, sure. This depends on how it is I think, like Kenny said, one really has to look at the different levels of risk. What is we have the risk that, for example, one country cannot supply. And then, of course, having another country in the mix is very helpful. However, I think what we can learn from the current pandemic is that in most cases where an entire country is being shut down, I mean, how can that happen? We see that from a virus topic, if one country is shut down, then it basically means that the other countries will follow. So having another country, let's take a very simple example, and please allow me to just use country names as examples. So China was shut down in February. Now, if we have a supply chain in India, in this particular situation, it would not be a perfect solution to the problem because India is also being shut down. So the question of whether we diversify by having different countries in the mix or by having different regions within a country, those are different, these questions address different angles of the risk management. And no matter what, I mean, in an ideal world, we have perfectly diversified supply where we get where we have international diversification plus within each country regional diversification. So yeah, of course, it would be nice, purchasing manager point of view, to have different countries in the mix. And then we need to consider, however, the costs that are associated. What is the cost of building up an integrated supply chain? I'll give you an example from another area. Ladies upper fashion, like coats and stuff. There's still this significant supply chain in China for this, because these supply chains require a lot of specialized accessories, for example. And as the textile production environment was shifting from China to lower cost countries such as Bangladesh, those very complex garments, they were still being produced in China because they needed the supply chains. Now the parallel to the rare earth environment is very clear. We see in the magnet production, for example, that the know-how that is needed to produce neodymium magnets, for example, to build that up in other competitive priced countries, that's a long road. So the question is, to build up the supply chains in another country, what is the cost that's associated with it, and how is that cost going to be borne?
Okay, thank you. We 2 minutes late. A final question. There are a few downstream players both in our panel and the audience. So I just want to raise this. Somebody raised this. Will this trigger downstream industry playing an active role in upstream, and also affecting new rare earth and CRM projects in Europe or elsewhere, Canada or Australia? So will this kind of crisis, put the downstream industry in active role? So any of you from the panel can share, Badri or Andrea, and Will. Yeah.
As I mentioned in a couple of conferences and in a couple of meetings also before, the downstream players has a vital role in linking up the whole value chain.
Yep.
That only all these green transition principles or the Green Deal principles which has been rolled out by any country towards the sustainability can be achieved. If the downstream players are only pushing towards the cost and being greedy, we will never reach to a state of sustainability. And second thing is actually one of the most important aspect is actually one has to go with an open eye when we want to have a diversified value chain, because sustainability should be an integral part of that, and sustainability doesn't come for free. So downstream players has a major role in all these aspects.
Anyone has any comments? Lutz or Andrea? This project, I mean, it could also be, it could be also the primary or secondary, projects like, our member Galaxy is supporting secondary or
I would like to share a perspective here. Let's hear. The role sustainability. I think we are now seeing that. What does sustainability mean? Sustainability also means that a supply chain is robust in times of crisis. And we do perceive that right now there is a certain momentum being gained for initiatives that aim to have more transparency and more communication along the value chain. One of the challenges we all have together, all of us, no matter what country we are from, is that the rare earth value chain is not a purely economic value chain, but there's also significant political component to it. And therefore, there's not always complete transparency across the entire value chain. What we're seeing now is that customers are asking for more transparency because they want to feel more secure. We're also feeling that, for example, our suppliers, they're asking our customers very directly, please give us transparency on what is happening in your company, so we know how to plan. So, for example, right now, our customers are telling our suppliers how many shifts they are running per week. Now, that's a lot of transparency that the Chinese suppliers are now getting from the German customers, which is also not so normal for the German companies. You know, we're talking about private companies here, right? To give such insights to the suppliers. So we are seeing that there's more transparency, more communication along the value chain, and also across borders. And we think that there's an opportunity to start some initiatives, which then, and sustainability from an environmental and social sense could be a good vehicle to catalyze the discussion and to get everybody talking more. So we can also, in REIA, so we can have even more stakeholders from still more perspectives along the value chain and from more countries.
Yep. Thank you, Lutz. That's a very nice closing point. And so with this, I like to close the webinar, and I will follow up with you with the presentation slides and a recording of the meeting to all the attendees. And thank you so much for participating. And Badri, do you have a final word to the participants, or should we close?
I really appreciate that actually you have all taken 2 hours of your time and participating in this webinar, and we would like to see such kind of webinars moving forward in REIA, giving the information on a global platform level. So I would like to thank you everyone for your active participation, and especially the panelists who has delivered a very interesting perspective under this critical crisis which we are facing through.
Yep.
Shimizu, do you want to say anything?
Kotaro-san?
Oh, what?
You want to say a final word? Yeah.
Oh yeah, thank you very much. Yes, it's my very great pleasure to share the current situation with Japan, one of the Asian country, and so very interested in the current situation of the junior mining company and downstream supply chain of the European countries. Okay, this is one for your information. Speaking of the diversity of the supply chain rest of China, and Japan and the United States and Australia has just begun to build a new supply chain between these 3 countries. And the one of this purpose is the improvement of the diversity of the procurement. The other purpose is the maintain of the technology or engineers related to the rare earth industry. JOGMEC, one of the Japanese governmental organization, have a big budget in this fiscal year for this project. For your information, thank you.
Yep. Thank you so much. And anyone else want to have? Constance?
I think we should continue this discussion.
Yep.
Because it has been very interesting. So I refrain from taking final words. However, again, I would like to encourage you all to give us information, let us know of your problems so that we can direct measures as appropriate. on a political level. I want to thank all the other panelists for very, very interesting talks, and all of you for, organizing a very interesting webinar. And I'm looking forward to the next one.
Yep. Thank you, Constance. And it was always happy to associate with the European Commission, and you were always helpful, Milan, Peter, everyone. And thank you so much for joining us. And thank you all. And we close here. And I will send you and follow up with you soon. Thank you so much.